Welcome back, guys, to the Butterfly Season podcast. Today, I have a friend of mine, Lindsey Roselle, on to talk about all things microdosing, psilocybin, journeys, like ayahuasca. I cried on this episode. I'm noticing a trend at this point, and motherhood and how all of those things are so intertwined, karmic patterns, like raising children. We really get into the thick of it on this episode, and it's so good, especially if you're a mom, aspiring mom, and talking about like how raising children is literal karmic work and undoing karmic patterns and allowing plant medicine to support you in that journey. This podcast is beautiful. It's one of my favorite, and so I'm excited for you guys to dive in. Lindsey, I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. We were chatting a little bit prior to pressing record, and I am so excited about all that we're going to dive into: motherhood, microdosing, healing, generational trauma, like all of the things. And so thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. You just listed off all my favorite topics. So it'll be great.
I do think it'll be really good. I'm excited to talk about this. I mentioned before, but when I finally told my mom that I was microdosing, I felt like that was like a weight lifted off of my shoulders, so to speak, to be able to talk about how great things have been for me. And now that we're at this point, I'm excited to get into it with you today. So talk to me, how did you even get into the world of microdosing? How were you introduced to it? Like where did it start for you?
Yeah. So how far back do you want to go? At birth? No. I feel like a lot of the things that have happened in my life have transpired to land me exactly here now. And microdosing is really new in my life, like within the last year and a half, but everything kind of conspired to lead me to the moment of finding psilocybin and plant medicine in general. But, like I grew up in the DARE era. Like I am an elder millennial. I have a criminal defense attorney as a dad, and my younger sister is also a criminal defense attorney. So I had a lot of messaging. I still have a lot of messaging in my mind, but, growing up as an ambitious girl, wanting to succeed, going to the best college, getting a corporate job, like all this messaging around achieve. And that served me well until it didn't, and I left the corporate world to become an entrepreneur in the mid 20-teens and have really focused on lots of different entrepreneurial endeavors since then, all with like very transparently, like this external orientation, just success. How does it look on the outside? Make money, like be successful, performance oriented, until 2020 when everything fell apart, which I know, we all had our own 2020 experiences, but for me, it meant I lost two of my businesses because they were both in-person oriented businesses, and they just absolutely could not be rebirthed after being closed down for that long. And my relationship fell apart because I think a lot of stuff that had built up over the years leading up to that time just came to a head in the intensity of everything that was happening then. So as I personally rebuilt in 2021 and 2022, and RT and I, my partner and I, rebuilt our relationship, I did a lot of inner work and we did a lot of therapy together, a lot of solo therapy. And I really started to dig into my childhood, but also just my identity around performance and, ambition and wanting to do all these things for whom, like I kept asking the question, like, why? Like, what do I really want? And I didn't really have an answer for that. And in early 2022, I was offered a spot in a mastermind that was a plant medicine focused mastermind. So it was with really high achieving people led by two very well-known, like high achieving coaches who are experienced in the plant medicine realm. And they had one spot open up because somebody got pregnant, she's actually now a friend of mine. And I was like, this is so edgy for me, like drugs are bad. I had definitely grown up with that messaging, and I had never really done much in the psychedelic space. Like I wasn't a dabbler in college or anything like that. And I just felt this call to join this mastermind. And the first trip we took was down to Peru.
Sorry, question for you. When you say a spot opened up in a mastermind, initially I was like, oh, like you were going to be like a coach, a complementing coach to the mastermind. You're saying this mastermind was like a mastermind where people get together and you work on, I don't know, personal business, whatever it is, but also complemented with people taking psilocybin journeys.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was for successful entrepreneurs. And the whole purpose of the mastermind was to expand your mind with plant medicine. So we did a couple plant medicine retreats and creativity. So we had a creative project that we had to focus on through the year of being in this mastermind together. So we did look at business stuff and we did look at personal development, but it was really focused on plant medicine and creativity. That's why it was so edgy for me, because I've only ever joined like business masterminds, you know?
And it's so backwards to think about, because when you think, in my mind, I am a creative at heart. I love to create, and I know that with creation, like all of the other things can come when you are in a flow state, when you are creating. Money comes, business comes, all the things, because you're creating. But when you think about somebody who's maybe more analytical, it's like, well, where do the dollars make sense if you're having me focus on creativity? Yeah. There's no strategy. There's no SOPs. There's no time, like whatever it is.
Yeah. And that part of our brain, a lot of us, especially as we get into like the upper echelons of success in entrepreneurship, we get much more focused on, you know, the strategy and not so much on the white space of creativity and letting our intuition speak in its art, you know? And that's really what drew me to this mastermind. Was I had done so much inner work, like figuring out the reasons for my identity and everything falling apart in the relationship, like all the traditional therapy stuff. But I had hit this wall around motherhood and ambition, and like, I just couldn't really answer the question, like, what do I really want to do? You know, like all these businesses fell apart for a reason, and I wasn't really aligned with them anymore anyway, but now what do I want to do? So I joined the mastermind, and it was a very stretchy investment. So I was like, okay, this better change my life, you know? And our first trip was down to Peru, and we sat with ayahuasca. Actually, the first trip, we sat with ayahuasca for 3 nights in a row, like up the jungle, like up the Amazon. We took a little boat 2 hours up the Amazon from this little jungle town that like the landing strip was literally a piece of concrete in the middle of the jungle. We landed there, got on a boat, and went up the Amazon 2 hours to this like eco lodge. And that's where we did ayahuasca. And we harvested our own ayahuasca that morning and sat with that Aya those 3 nights. So it was
insane.
Is
powerful, because it's like whatever you picked is for you.
Yes. Yeah. It was, even my leaders, one of the leaders he's done like 70 sits with ayahuasca. And he said it was the most powerful ayahuasca he's ever consumed. And like in terms of how it affected him. And I was like, cool. So I just got on the high dive and like jumped, not knowing how to swim. But you know, that really started the plant medicine journey for me. And I have a whole episode on my podcast if you're interested in the ayahuasca experience. Cause for me, it was incredibly deep and very scary. Like the first night especially was very scary, and just really transparently, like that can happen for people with ayahuasca. It is a very powerful psychedelic. And so I was kind of sketched out by that. Like I was like, I don't know that I want to do more after this.
Define scary. Like in your body, were you like seeing things with your eyes open? Were you seeing things with your eyes closed? Like what was?
Yes, all of the above. I think a lot of it was very powerful hallucinogenic. And so ayahuasca is DMT. It's not psilocybin. So DMT is acts differently on the brain than psilocybin does. It's a little bit more, I don't know the actual technical terms, but it mimics death. Like you really feel like it's full ego death, especially at those big macro doses. And so your brain experiences this like subconscious belief that you're dying. And so even though you're not, like your body doesn't have any of those sensations, nothing hurts or anything like that, but it's just, it heightens anxiety. Like you have this rush of anxiety as you peak, because your ego is thinking that you're dying. And that's the magic of it, is like your ego dissolves and you can really see yourself very clearly. And you get into these levels of the subconscious. Like the journey I went on was so incredibly profound. And it answered questions about me and my identity and my blocks that I would have never gotten to in 10 years of talk therapy. So in hindsight, it was definitely worth it, you know, but those 3 nights were very intense. The second and third nights weren't as scary, but the first night was, and it was like the ceremony was the first night, the ceremony was structured to be a clearing out of the darkness. So it was set up to be a little bit darker, but all of that is to say basically that like stepping into plant medicine work, I believe you have to have been doing some inner work ahead of time, because you can't really go into the depth of working with DMT or psilocybin and not know yourself, because it can be very scary. Like the stuff that comes up from your subconscious, maybe things that you don't want to look at or you aren't equipped to examine yet. And that's just not a safe situation for anybody if you haven't done at least the initial stages of inner work to get to know yourself and be able to be safe within. And so I started with the Aya, and then when we came back, we did 3 months of integration. After a rest period, we did 3 months of integration with psilocybin. So we started with microdosing. And that really is, I credit the psilocybin microdosing during the integration of ayahuasca with the massive transformation that I went through in terms of knowing myself, having the answer to the question of like, what do I want? And also just the richness of what psilocybin brings in terms of the connection to oneness and nature and like a sense of community. And I think that's why now, you know, I don't feel a desire now, about a little over a year out from being in Peru. I feel no additional desire to go on like a deep ayahuasca journey ever again. Like I really am not called to that at all. But I have really stuck with microdosing and have built a whole microdosing company now, because I think that the medicine can work in you in small subperceptual doses, maybe not to the level of like potency and extremity that it can in the big macro doses. But if you're someone who's not called to a macro dose, you can get some of the benefits of the medicine by doing the microdosing inside of a practice and have profound effect. And I believe that so strongly from my own experience and from talking to people like you, where you're like, I started it and it's incredible. And so now, I have a microdosing practice and I have a microdosing education company with a business partner, and the industry is just exploding, and for good reason.
It's interesting because as we get into this, like, I don't know, higher level of entrepreneurship, I guess, or higher level of success, the amount of times that I bring up microdosing to people, or when people are like, oh, you're feeling lighter, you seem happier, you seem whatever. And I'm like, dude, like I've been microdosing and like things are great. Things feel really great, but no one talks about it. So I'm like so happy that you're like kind of peeling back the veil a little bit. But when you said on that first night that you were experiencing like ego death and you were able to see yourself more clearly, and it was like a transformational experience, as much as you're willing to share, because I know like when I've done my own outside of microdosing, but like psilocybin journeys, they've been very, very deeply personal. Like I don't think I fully understood what people meant when they said shadow work. Like I didn't understand that at all until I guess I experienced my own. Could you help us understand like what came up? Maybe if it's like one central theme that was super powerful, what came up in ayahuasca, how that felt, and then how integration helped like close that loop, or how integration helped like transform whatever that thing was.
Yeah. So going in, I really didn't do any research on ayahuasca. And like I said, I'd never done any like big serious psychedelic trip. So I had no idea what to expect. And our mastermind prepared us a little bit, but they were careful not to like give you too much information or too much to like ruminate on. So I went in, and the ceremony we did was in the Shipibo tradition. So there's chanting and there's these shakers, and it's pitch black, and the hut is out over the Amazon on stilts. So you can hear the Amazon alive underneath you and around you. And the shamans, there were 3 different shamans, and they're all chanting. And it was just, the auditory experience of it alone was so intense. And
are you chanting?
No, we're all sitting like in a semicircle around the shamans, and it takes about 30 minutes after you drink it for it to really hit you. And so we're just kind of sitting and meditating, and they're chanting and singing. And as it hit me, it felt like this veil closed, like curtains at a movie theater. It was like, vroom, and it immediately became alive in my mind. Like there was just visuals and
eyes closed.
Yeah. Eyes closed.
Okay.
As long as I could. My eyes did open some because I was really fighting it for a while.
Like not wanting to drop in. Sorry, I keep interrupting you. No, I'm like trying to paint the picture in my own mind right now too.
Yeah. And I have like a 90-minute episode where I go into it in really big detail. But yes, I was fighting it because it was alarming. Like it dropped in so fast. And I had never had that experience of like the drop in, which if you hang out with people who do a lot of psychedelics, like there's this whole arc to the experience where you drop in, you hit the peak, and then as you come down, you like parachute back down into reality. And it does feel like really light and floaty as you come back down. But for me, that drop in was loud. Like it was bright colors and like static. And in preparation, I had talked about what I thought might come up. And one of the things that I had talked about was motherhood. And I didn't really have any words for what I was thinking might come up about it, but just that motherhood had felt really hard for me ever since I became a mother and was an entrepreneur, and like how I was doing both, you know, and I always felt like I wasn't the best I could be at either. And that felt like impossible to make one or the other better than the other. You know, I'm like, I don't want to just be the best entrepreneur and sacrifice motherhood, but I also don't want to be like the best mom ever and suck at my business. And so I felt really stuck in that. So that was really the only intention I came in with. And I drop in and it drops me into like 1994 when I was 12 years old, which was when, and I knew it was 1994 because the 1994 was like flashing all over in the visuals.
Wow.
And I had a lot of like, just like flashes of memories from that time, like where we lived, the car my dad drove, like just different, like deeply personal little snippets of memories that I hadn't thought of since, you know, I remember them now that they came out in the memory or in the visuals, but I hadn't like, those weren't trauma memories. They weren't core memories. They were just little like vignettes of my life. That's when I was fighting it. Cause I was like, what is this? You know, like what am I seeing? And then as it got like closer to the peak, everything started to dissolve. And interestingly enough, the word that Adam, one of the leaders, had given me the night before and our like final dinner was, we had each gotten a word and mine was dissolve. And they gave me the symbol of the butterfly. And, you know, he's like, you've been in a cocoon and you've been the caterpillar and like, you're ready. You have dissolved. Like you need to finish your dissolution tonight. Or this trip, and like you need to be the butterfly, which is so funny.
Wow, why do I want to cry right now?
I know. Oh, I was like sobbing. I mean, I cried so much on this trip.
Yeah, and not even in relation to the name of the podcast or like what I talk about, just in general. But like I think maybe I feel how I felt in my cocoon season, and just feeling like okay, it's time to go. But it's oddly you're so comfortable in being in the cocoon because you've been there for so long, even though you want to get out.
Right. The cocoon is so comfortable, especially if you've been through trauma or like in 2020, 2021, like when my relationship had hit the rocks and everyone in my life, because I had local businesses, everyone knew it. Everyone knew me. I was well known locally. And so my entire friend group was somehow involved in what happened with RT and I. And that was such a yucky feeling. And I literally cut every single one of them out of my life. And the cocoon was really necessary at that point so that I could insulate from them because I didn't want to have contact with anybody. But then it started to become limiting. And I was like, I want to expand again. I want to be the real me, but I don't know how to like come back out. And that's what he had kind of set the stage for the night before and giving me that word. And as I hit the peak of the Aya, the visual was like almost like Salvador Dali, like everything just started to melt. And I was like, I could feel myself literally circling the drain. And I'm circling in this drain of like putrid melting identity. And my children were in there, but I couldn't, their faces were gone. They were just like blank. And there was a mirror and I kept saying to myself, like, I can't see my face. I can't see my face. And I remember thinking like, what are my kids' names? And I couldn't remember their names. And that was really scary. And that's what they describe a lot. Like if you listen to Huberman talk about psychedelic experiences and like the science of a psychedelic experience, as you hit the peak of the medicine and the serotonin and everything, and like your brain just flooded, it does feel, your ego is just like, what the hell? Like, who am I? Your subconscious really comes to the forefront and is like, everything you know about yourself isn't real, you know? And that was that moment where I was so deep in the Aya that literally my identity melted. And I remember, I don't know how long this all took. Like I remember coming out of it and it had been about 3 hours since I drank it, but I don't know like where in the 3 hours the peak happened. But as I come out of the peak, I like plop down into what I can only really describe as like hell. Like it was like the moon. There was no like atmosphere. It was just hell, like dark and burnt. Everything was burnt. And it was like orange and red and green and not brights, like burned colors. And this consciousness spoke to me. And I immediately knew it was my grandmother, my mom's mom, who was a deeply troubled, traumatized, you know, I will say, and I said this on my own podcast, evil woman. She had evil in her. And she terrorized my mother as a child. And my mom bears the scars of that, literally and figuratively to this day. And her mothering of my mother affected my mom's mothering of me. And
right. So just passed down generational trauma. Yeah. Yes.
So I confront her in hell. And it's not like her physicality. It's like her consciousness. And she says to me, I suffered, so you'll suffer. And like, that's what I took away from ayahuasca. And all of this was like this energy that had existed in my maternal lineage of I suffered, so you'll suffer. And that's what I had felt. Like, I didn't know it. Like you're saying, the shadow, right? Like I met the shadow of I suffered, so you'll suffer. That's the energy I had towards motherhood. And it's like, well, everyone suffers in motherhood. You're just going to suffer. Like you just have to bear, like,
I'm like crying right now.
Yeah. And, you know, so I'm sitting with her consciousness and she's speaking to me. And I remember enough like of the external situation of like, I started to like really be repulsed by it. And like, I started to feel like I needed her out. Like I kept moving my arms and I opened my eyes a couple of times and the music was so intense at that point.
The music from the shamans.
From the shamans.
Okay,
the music and the chanting was so intense. And I remember him the main shaman coming to me, and they have these like shakers made of a palm leaf that they shake over you. And they smoke mapacho, which is like tobacco. And he took a big like draw off his cigar, and he blows the smoke on my face. And like at this time I'm like, get her out, get her out, get her out. Like I'm saying it over and over and over. Because she just kept screaming, like her consciousness just kept screaming at me in hell. Like I thought I was stuck in hell with her forever. And he comes over and I literally remember, it gives me goosebumps now, like him pulling her out of me, like with the smoke and the shakers and his chant. And he's like chanting at me. He's touching my head. He's blowing smoke on my face. And he's like yelling the chant at me. And then all of a sudden it's like whoomp, and this like dark energy leaves me. And I like at that point, I think I came out of it. Like, I feel like the drugs were wearing off at that point too, where I kind of opened my eyes and it was like a whole new world. I was still obviously under the influence because it also lit up the room like the Matrix. Like I could see grids and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I was just in her consciousness. And I had this awareness, like after hours of being in the psychedelic experience, I immediately had an awareness of what the message was, which which doesn't happen with everybody, but for me it did. And it was this, like, I had to go confront her in hell to stop this generational trauma around motherhood and to understand that her experience of motherhood being about suffering and making my mother's experience of her that doesn't have to be my experience of it. And the next 2 nights were kind of the beginning of the integration of that. And the next 2 nights were staged in a whole different way by the shamans. Like they were much brighter. There was candles. They sang lullabies and melodies instead of like chants. And I took a smaller dose so that I didn't have to go so deep. But like coming off of that and that experience and like having that profound encounter with her consciousness and with the identity of motherhood in my shadow, the integration that happened after that for many months was this deep questioning of what does my life look like now? Because I have these 2 little babies who I love and who I would do anything for and die for, and like freaking so cute, and I'm not just a mom. Like I don't want to just be a mom. It's not enough for me. And that felt like scary to say before this, to say to the world, I'm just being a mom isn't enough. Because that's where I felt like I would get the most judgment from people.
Right.
And I came out of that experience going, I need to have this conversation. Like I need to talk about motherhood and how hard it is in the context of being an entrepreneur and in the context of being ambitious, because, there's a lot out there for babies and like postpartum, and there's a lot out there for ambition and entrepreneurship. There's not a lot out there going, hey, entrepreneurship and being a boss babe and all that is awesome until you become a mother. And then all of a sudden you have a whole different evaluation of what meaning means to you and bringing meaning into your work. And if you aren't in alignment anymore with what you've created in your business, all of a sudden you're really, really out of alignment because that baby is calling to you. And we've got to find a way to heal our identities to come back into this place of what do I really want in terms of my ambition and my motherhood, so that it's not suffering, because I feel like suffering is what so many women think that they have to do once they become mothers. Like it's just all suffering. And I thought that, clearly I had that shadow. And so then starting into the psilocybin over the summer of last year to help with that integration really grounded me in the day-to-day experience of connection and of creativity and flow. And not that it like was the be all and end all. We can talk about, what it's great for, but for me, the integration period with the assistance of the microdosing helped me to stay in the connection to the greater oneness, right? Like that I could trust my intuition when something didn't feel right and I would be supported by consciousness. I could trust myself to make a bold move, and I would be supported by the universe. I could be present with my kids and not be so worried about money, you know, like all these little things. It was like every day I could come back into my life and go, wow, this is a thing that would have really stressed me out previously. But now I have this new perspective and the support of psilocybin. I'm better. And like every day I was able to change the habits and the patterns and also be more in the creativity, which was such a huge missing piece for me because I had been so conditioned over the years of entrepreneurship leading up to this, where I thought, like you said, the more successful we get as entrepreneurs, the less creativity we have time for because the more strategy we need to be doing. And so my first initial 90 days of microdosing was very creativity focused. And it was incredibly uncomfortable for a lot of it because it was getting new muscles built around being creative, you know, but my podcast was born and a whole lot of new things kind of unfolded over the last year that I credit to the deep journey with ayahuasca and then the continual journeys with psilocybin. I still have my own agency and sovereignty. Like I'm not giving all credit to the plant medicine, but I guarantee you I would not be here. No amount of talk therapy or inner work on its own would have gotten me to this level of awareness and the like magic that's happening in my life right now if it weren't for the psilocybin.
Thank you for sharing that because I was very vulnerable. So beautiful. I literally cried.
Literally, I cried for months. Yeah.
Not even figuratively. I literally, if you're listening, tears came down my face. If you're watching, you've seen them. But I think the reason why it got me so emotional is because I have a lot of my story, my mom's story in your story. Mm-hmm. And I had a therapist on who was talking about like codependency. I working through codependency, and they were talking about like parents and how certain types of parents, narcissistic parents can raise codependent children and all of the things. And I started microdosing, and my mom and I like had healing conversations around how she was parented when I was younger. Granted, this wasn't something that parents should do. It is kind of trauma dumping. But when I was younger, she had said, I don't know how to love. My mom never loved me. So you have to teach me how to love as a child. And so then I just make whatever in my mind mean whatever it was. And it was accolades. I would get praise. If I would perform really well, I would get praise from my mom. And so to me, I'm like, that loop is love.
I have a similar loop. Yes.
Yep. And then she said to me at one point in time, and this was a recent conversation, I have yet to share this on the podcast, and I'll get into much deeper in it at some point in time, but it's fitting right now, feels good right now. And she had said, I realized that a lot of the things that I had done to you or treated you, and there was like two circumstances that had really stuck out in my mind. One particularly, the other one I forgot had happened, and she had reminded me. And she was like, and I realized that I do that. I was parenting you how my mom parented me, and I did not like that. And I promised to not do that to you anymore. I want to like build our relationship. I want to like come together, because if I'm the tree and you're the branch, but if I'm a rotten tree, then the branch will rot itself. And I was like, are you in therapy? Are you microdosing? What is happening? Like, she is like true and true baby boomer, like none, you know what I mean? So that was a really healing moment for my mom and I around generational trauma, because I think when we hear that term and when you're telling the story, I'm like, yeah, generational trauma totally gets passed down with behaviors and patterns and things like that. But what people fail to realize is that when your grandmother was birthing or pregnant with your mom, she was also creating you.
Yeah, you were in her. Yeah, I know. Goosebumps. That's why.
Yes.
That's why this work was so stunningly like potent. You know, I'm like, I was in her when her experience of her mother, you know, so like that's how it passes, especially in maternal lineage. It's insane.
It really is. And then when we think about, you know, things that happen while you are pregnant, stress, trauma, whatever it is, that impacts obviously the DNA and how your baby is created. That's just science. And so it's so interesting to hear that that's something that you've broken. A friend sent me this meme. It wasn't even a meme. It was like a quote on Instagram. And it said that like parenthood, birthing a child, raising a child, bringing a child into this world is karmic work, because if you are self-aware, you're undoing and relearning and unlearning patterns from your mom, your mom's mom, your dad's dad, and also your partner's parents and grandparents, and putting that together in one and trying to like untangle or unwind this like history of trauma.
Yeah, I know. And we all have it, you know, and that's the word trauma, and it all gets thrown around so much on Instagram. And, you know, and I think a lot of that is super positive in the sense that it's raising the awareness. And some of it also allows us to almost bypass it because like, oh, we all have trauma. Like your trauma is not any worse than mine. But when you really stop and you get present with it and you do the uncomfortable work of sitting with it, not, you know, dumping it on other people, not telling a lot of stories about it on Instagram for the likes and the sympathy, but really sitting in the uncomfortable experiences like therapy or like meditation or plant medicine journeys and things like that. And you really do have these moments of confronting exactly what you're talking about, where it's like this, whether you're a parent or not, you know, you're looking at how much of what I believe about the world and how much of what I believe about myself is really me, and how much of it is from other people, my parents and their parents, and the DNA, and, you know, and the stress that she experienced when she was pregnant with me, and these things where it's not that I don't have agency to change those things, but I didn't create them in myself. I am only a witness to their effect on me. And as you start to be able to sit in those uncomfortable moments and separate that identity apart and go, this part of the identity is really me. This is my, you know, like autonomous being that wants these things and believes these things. And then these are things that come from experiences I had or messages I got or, you know, generational trauma. And I don't have to be these things if I don't want to be anymore. That's, I think, the work that, you know, we should all be doing, and probably is too much for a lot of us. It can be very painful, like hard work for over a long amount of time, but that's what you're mentioning, where it's like, it liberates you. It sets you free. It gives you the opportunity to go be who you really want to be, like to leave the cocoon as the butterfly and go be the beautiful butterfly in the world. And isn't that what we all want?
Right. And when people are in that season, I'm always like, this is the best part. But it's like with my hindsight eyes, right? Like having done these reps multiple times, like when shit comes up, I'm like, okay, let's go. Cause it's like, it gets better. But like the longer that I prolong this, the longer I prolong this, the longer it will be, literally. So I want to get into the motherhood aspect. Out of my friends, I'm one of the only ones without children. And so, especially my best friends, and I'll tell them like, hey, I'm microdosing. Hey, this has been really great. And most of the sentiment actually from all of them has been, God, like, I wish I would have done that before children. I cannot afford to do that right now. All of the things. And it's the same. And I had subscribed to the belief like, yeah, you're right. I am lucky that I did this before, because I probably wouldn't also have time. Help me reconcile that. What does that look like for you in your journey? What did it mean for you to do this or even continue to do microdosing as a mom?
I mean, it's interesting because there's so many reasons that could be the case. Like cost is definitely part of it because it's, you know, an unregulated and not fully legal industry currently. And so the prices are a little higher because you're paying for the risk of the producer, you know? So there's definitely a cost aspect. But I think for me, I mean, I had no introduction to any of this stuff before I became a mother. I've only found it, you know, my kids are 4 and 6, or almost 4, almost 6 as we record today. And looking back, I'm like, I honestly don't know the mindset that I was in at the time. I wasn't even self-aware at all, you know? And so microdosing may not have helped me in those moments. Whereas now becoming a mother and being in the new identity and really realizing like, oh, holy shit, I'm on a ride and I need support right now. I need any support I can get, because putting the identity back together after becoming a mother feels like that's where the big work is. You know, you can do a lot to prepare for sure. And it's great that you're doing it to prepare. And you won't know what has to be repaired until the house blows down and you have to rebuild it, you know? And so that being said, the people that I know today, because of my work with microdosing, I speak with a lot of women who are either pregnant or are new moms, and there is this growing interest and growing movement in the sense of like, I'm willing to do it now, pregnant or even, you know, in early motherhood, because it's either this or I go on an SSRI. It's like, it's either this or I go on an antidepressant. It's either this or go on an anti-anxiety because I'm already struggling and there really aren't a lot of tools for it. And, you know, I'm not a medical doctor and it is illegal in all states. So like all those disclaimers, very, very, you know, real, but there are a lot of really well-known side effects to almost every pharmaceutical drug that treats a lot of the stuff that women deal with either prior to or after becoming mothers. And in my mind, I'm like, I trust a plant medicine that has thousands of years of anecdotal and researched results more than I trust, for me, putting in my body something that I know has known pharmaceutical side effects, especially when I'm pregnant or have, you know, young kids. And so, you know, with people who are in that early motherhood journey, I always say, of course, like consult with whomever you feel you need to consult with, but trust your intuition and know that oftentimes I found the side effects of some of the pharmaceuticals are the things that are causing like the lack of sex drive, the numbing sensations, like those are the things that cause you to get even further out of alignment with what you really want and who you really are. And so if you can find something like psilocybin that keeps you in relationship with yourself, keeps you in relationship with oneness and this belief in like compassion and love and community, that's the path I would go. You know, so if I had it to do over again and I was choosing now, I would not go on prescription drugs. I would do microdosing. Now, of course, there's legal and financial considerations. And to those, you know, the only thing I can really say to that is educate yourself and calculate the risks for your own, you know, your own life. To my knowledge, there is no state that's heavily enforcing any rules around microdosing. It's one of those substances that's, yes, it's, you know, classified as an illegal drug, but our country has much bigger problems, you know? And so I feel like you see it on Instagram a lot. You see it on TikTok a lot. You see people selling, you know, like definitely verify your source and get educated about it and all of that. But the risk calculation I've made and being so public talking about it, and even at being a mother and being so public talking about it, is I would rather be the best version of myself and in the most alignment I can possibly be and the healthiest mentally I can be, because that's what my kids will benefit the most from. And I trust that the risk I'm taking is calculated based on the benefit I'm getting on a daily basis of being a better human.
Right. No, that makes total sense. So you had mentioned before that you wouldn't recommend a journey per se, maybe even microdosing if you weren't already like doing some sort of self-work. Define what that meant for you, for somebody who may be listening and is like, I'm a person not doing the self-work. So like cancel me out from like doing microdosing. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's that I think before I would have thought, oh, I'm going to go do one of these journeys, like the deep journeys, or I'm going to get on this microdosing and it will just fix the problem. Like, just like, you know, I have ADHD and I've had Ritalin for a long time. And when you take Ritalin, if you're listening, you know what Ritalin or Adderall feels like you take it and you don't have ADHD anymore, right? Like while it's active in your system, you feel like a different human, like it just fixes it. But that's not really getting at the root cause of the problem of attention deficit and being easily distracted and all of that. So that's what I think I would have expected the plant medicines to do prior to doing all the work and understanding that they really need your intention. Mm-hmm. I would have just expected to take it and just feel better. And when I didn't have that happen, you know, and that's really the reason I say that is I don't want you to go into a journey or start microdosing and expect it to just fix everything and then have that not fix everything and then be like, oh, this doesn't work. It will only work to the extent that you give it intention. You know, it will only work to the extent that you have cleared enough pathway for it to go into your mind and work on your neural pathways and your neuroplasticity. Like if you are still living into your patterns and not curious about them at all and not open to changing them, the neural pathways won't change. But if you're giving the intention to the medicine to say, hey, I have some patterns in my life that I know are negatively affecting me and I don't know why, and I haven't done deep work to unwind them, but I do know that this, and this are patterns in my life that I don't love. I'd like to work on them. Right. And then you set the medicine into your system. That's when it can go in and work with your subconscious to rewire those pathways and give you new neuroplasticity in old patterns. And so that's what I mean by it. In my experience is like, if you think it's going to be the easy button that you push and it cures everything, it won't be. 2 or 3 big macro journeys in a row. If you do, big psilocybin macro journeys in a row, you might be able to go into those totally cold and have a life-changing experience just because they're so profound. But most of us don't have access or desire to do it that way. But especially with microdosing, I really, really believe you really need to know yourself well enough to know what intention to give it. And then it will work its magic.
I definitely agree with that. I started microdosing. I mean, I guess generally I would have to classify myself as someone who like does like loose self work. In the point in time in my life when it met me, I was like in cocoon season and just like trying to get out and not entirely sure if I was out or if I even wanted to be out. But I didn't have integration. I didn't. Yeah. So emotions would come up, but it was like I was holding them and didn't know what to do with them.
Integration's a huge part of it.
Right. And I would just be like, well, here we are. I want to cry. This is how I'm feeling. And if I would process, like verbally process how I was feeling, like I would generally feel better, but it wasn't apparent to me to notice patterns or notice that this triggered this, that triggered that triggered this, right? Like I didn't notice that yet. But when I had a trigger around a really deep trauma wound is when I was like starting to feel really anxious, like I was going to die. So then I was like literally going to die. So I hired a therapist that works with plant medicine and have been integrating with her ever since. And it has been such a beautiful experience. And I do agree, like some of the stuff that we've done in the last, I don't know, like maybe 9 months that we've been working together is like, feels like a lifetime's worth of stuff. Hard, beautiful, sad, happy, all of it. And so I love that you mentioned that. And my next question for you would be for somebody who's listening in is like, I don't want to build a dependency on that. It seems like, when I say, yeah, I'm microdosing, things are great. People are noticing that I'm great, or that I'm doing great, that I'm feeling great, that I'm acting great. Like I'm vibing high vibes, all of the things. I am not, for me at least, I'm not every single day. I'm not microdosing. Like I did it maybe for like 4 months and then took a break. And then I did it for like 2 months and then took a break, just intuitively knew, okay, I'm going to like stop doing it now. But still like the themes of what's happening in my life don't stop. So the integration with the therapist has also been very beneficial for me. So talk to me about if someone were to say to you, I don't want to do this because I don't want to build a dependency on it. I don't want to be stuck to microdosing if I'm depressed. I don't want to be stuck to microdosing if I'm feeling anxious. Like, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, valid. And I think a lot of that fear comes from how we're conditioned from the pharmaceutical industry that like once you start something, you can't get off of it, especially in the mental health space. A lot of the drugs that are prescribed frequently for depression or anxiety are altering, state altering enough that it's not that you're addicted to them, but they alter your personality or your reality enough that like getting off of them can be scary. And I'm not talking about people that have like deep clinical depression or like paralyzing anxiety to the point where if you got off of those drugs, your life is in danger. Like we're not talking about that. If you are on drugs because your life is in danger, if you're not on them, stay on them and don't even attempt the microdosing stuff right now. Like wait till there's more evidence, wait till you can talk with a psychiatrist and really do it the right way. But for those of us who are kind of in that space of like you and I are talking about where we're in this cocoon phase and it can feel really depressing or it can trigger incredible anxiety, and you go to a therapist, and the old paradigm may have been to be like, hey, let's just get you on an anti-anxiety. If you're having paralyzing anxiety to the point where you think you're going to die, like let's get you on an anti-anxiety drug instead of, to help you through the period. And then also let's keep you in years of therapy, which may be the solution for a lot of people. But I think there's this new paradigm where we're going, let's get at the root cause. And if you're willing and wanting to get at the root cause, then you can use some of this plant medicine in conjunction with therapy and other modalities to address something. And then yes, take a break from it, and address something and then take a break from it. And there's no addiction because you're not altering your state. Like it's sub-perceptual. So it's not going to put you into like some of the pharmaceuticals would be, where you get dependent on how you feel or you get dependent on how you don't feel, right? Like the pharmaceuticals are working to take away the feeling of depression or the feeling of anxiety. So if you get off of them, that feeling comes rushing back. when you work with something like psilocybin, it's not going to take it away. It's just going to give you the opportunity to look at it and to resolve it and to be in relationship with it. And so, if you're severe enough where you need it to be taken away to preserve your life, that's what the pharmaceuticals are for. If you're suffering from it and it's affecting you, but you want to be in relationship with your depression or the things that are depressing, you want to be in relationship with the things that give you anxiety. The psilocybin is a great way to do that in protocols, in periods of time where you're going to give it intention and go, you know what, that, like you were saying, this thing kept coming up for me and it was causing a lot of anxiety and I had to process it. And the psilocybin helps me process it. So in general, it's not addicting. There's no evidence that it's addicting in the way that a pharmaceutical would be addicting or where you would have a dependency on it for an altered state. But they do recommend, so there's been a lot of research that there's pretty much no amount of it you can take that would cause a dependency, but it can deplete certain systems of the body. And so it is good to give yourself a break. So what you described or what I do, 3 to 4 months max maybe up to 6 months from some people I've heard, where you can cycle on a protocol for 3, 4, 6 months, then taking a couple months of break to let your body just kind of smooth everything back out and get back to a new normal baseline and really observe what that new normal is for you. And then if you want to go back on another cycle, you can. So in our microdosing company, I always tell people, we really want you to do at least 60 days because absolutely at least 30 days, but really 60 days. So you can go through a whole cycle of your life, a couple months of your life where you're going to have hard things happen. You're going to have exciting things happen. You're going to have your daily routines and you can kind of level out and see how it's helping you across a longer period of your life. And then, you can take a month or 2 off and you can come back and you can try a different protocol. You can try a different product because there's lots of different strains and blends and all kinds of stuff. But no, there's no chemical dependency. It is not something like a pharmaceutical where you would develop a dependency or an addiction to it. And it's subperceptual. So even if you and I have felt it makes this huge difference in our lives, but you don't day to day, at least I don't when I take it. If you're taking good quality actual microdoses, it's not like you take it and you immediately feel different,
I don't feel
right?
anything.
You don't really feel anything, but it's the additive effect over time and how it's rewiring your brain with the addition of your intentional work with it.
The only time I felt something was the first 3 days on it. And I want to say the first day or maybe day 2, I had felt buzzing in my brain. My brain was I don't know, vibrating, but my brain, not my head, just my brain. Yeah. And so I looked it up and it was this often happens to high stress people. Your brain is creating new neural pathways. And I'm oh, yep, check. But that was the only time that I ever felt anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a true microdose is between 0.1 to 0.3, 0.4 grams of the mushroom. Now, you have to be really careful when you're describing these quantities because most people on the mushroom world, the black market will sell you grams of mushrooms and they're meaning the actual mushroom that has psilocybin inside of it. So if you take 3 grams of magic mushrooms, you eat 3 grams of mushrooms, you're going to go on a ride. You will be tripping.
Ride.
But that's not 3 grams of psilocybin. So the basic measurement that I heard on Huberman, so I trust it, the expert he was interviewing, is that 1 gram of magic mushrooms, about 1% of that is actual psilocybin. So when we say that a microdose is 0.1 to 0.3 grams, so 10 milligrams, or no, 100 milligrams to 350 milligrams, we're talking of the mushroom that has psilocybin in it, not the psilocybin chemical itself, because what's happening now is people are distilling out just the psilocybin. So in a clinical setting, when you are administered psilocybin in a clinical setting, they're only giving you psilocybin. And so they will give you 10 grams. So a microdose of pure psilocybin would be 10 to 25 milligrams, whereas a microdose of the magic mushroom itself is 100 to 350 milligrams. So a factor of 10.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So if you're buying a lot of the sites that you can go on or on the internet to go buy microdoses, you'll see that the capsules or whatever they're selling you as a microdose typically will be around between 0.1 and 0.3 grams in a capsule or in a gummy or whatever you're buying it in. So that's, that amount is for most people not psychoactive. Like it's sub-perceptual. You may feel it the first couple of times you take it because even in a small amount, it's still mind altering, and so you might get a little bit of the buzzing feeling, or you might get just that little like enhanced. For me, even now I still get like on days that I microdose, like today, I like the trees look greener to me. I'm just like, there's just like, they almost glow, which feels like woo woo to say, but it's true. Like you get this slightly enhanced visual and you get like a little bit more connection to nature, where I look at trees and grass and I'm like, ooh, green.
Yes.
So you're not tripping or anything, but you can sometimes feel like just that slight enhancement. But a true microdose is not enough in your system to cause any major big effect. So the likelihood that it would ever cause you to feel dependent on it is low. And there's no research or anything that shows it has any adverse effect for over long-term use. The main reason that people advise to take breaks is to renormalize, so that you, the human, can say, oh, like new me after 6 months of microdosing actually doesn't feel that stressed about money anymore. Oh, like I actually don't want to be in this relationship anymore. Like you can normalize your life at a new level and go, oh, some things aren't as stressful as they used to be. Okay. And then you can step back into the practice again and tackle something new.
Yeah. The normalization part is a little bit like interesting for me, to see something that I felt so strongly about just dissipate. Don't care about it anymore. Don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm unsubscribing from that. Like that has been, it's really weird to see in real time. So yeah. Tell me about your company. How can people find you? What are all of the things that your company offers?
So I have kind of two main things we've talked about today. One is my podcast called Motherhood, and it focuses on ambition and devotion. And it's really the byproduct of my personal journey over the last year and a half of unlocking everything we talked about with ayahuasca. And I don't go into plant medicine a lot on that, but I do talk a lot about the themes of ambition and motherhood. So if you're an ambitious mama, that's a great place to go. And I do talk about microdosing fairly frequently because it's a real part of my experience. And then I have another business called Inner Alchemy, and it's linked in my Instagram bio. I'm sure you can put it in the show notes. But Inner Alchemy, I started with a friend of mine here in Colorado, where we live. In Colorado, mushrooms are decriminalized. So we are allowed to possess them. We are allowed to take them. We are allowed to talk about them publicly, all the things. So we started it here in Colorado, and it is a education company primarily. So we have a online course you can buy that's self-guided. It's under $100. It gives you all of like the introduction to everything we talked about today. Really gives you like, especially if you're kind of microdosing curious, but not sure where to go, it's a great place to start. We do a lot of education on our social media, and we like to support you. We were going to have a community, but decided like, it's a pretty personal journey. And because it's still not fully legal, it's better to not put people in community with each other yet until there's a little bit more legal traction. So if you need support if you have questions, or you have, you want to start and you don't know what to do or how to get it, you can DM us. And then we have a partnership with a supplier that we trust that's also here in Colorado. And of course, still not fully, on the legal side of everything. But in Colorado, the decriminalization effort is afoot. And our belief as me and Rachel, my business partner, it's had such an effect on our lives. And we were buying it from like Signal and Telegram, and like half the time getting our money stolen by people who never sent anything. And, like, because you're trying to get a substance that's still classified as a Schedule 1 drug, like it's this weird world of there's so much compelling research and so much traction in our discourse around how powerful it is, but then like to get it, you still are on the black market. So that just didn't feel good, especially like we're millennial moms. I'm like, I don't want to buy stuff from like a drug dealer.
Right.
So we did a lot of research and partnered with a company here in Colorado that is like, they're incredible. All of the stuff that they sell is already dosed out as microdosing. So you can buy it in protocol and you can buy it in dose. So you'll get sent to you exactly what you need to take. You don't have to do anything other than take the capsule. So we can, I don't usually speak about that brand publicly, but if you come to Inner Alchemy, we can refer you to them.
Oh, nice. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with my community. And also just thanks for like pouring in and dropping in with me on all of this and sharing your most vulnerable parts of the journey. When people would talk about ayahuasca or people would talk about a psilocybin journey, I feel like it's always very vague. And it wasn't until I did my own that I understood like why. It's because it's just so deeply personal. And like for a handful of people, I've kind of shared like, you know, what my journey has been like or what the shadow work has looked like and what the closed integration loop has looked like. And so I say all that to say thank you so much for just giving us an insight on what that looks like for you and how it's been transformational, not only for you, but also your children and the impact of how you raise children and how they grow up to be in this world. Having sat with the shadow of the generational curse and like choosing to like no longer subscribe to that. I'm just grateful to have you on. This was like literally a beautiful experience. So I appreciate you so much.
Thanks for having me. I love this.